Story 1. The Loop on Highway 50. Marcus had been driving the same route between Kansas City and Denver for 12 years. He knew every rest stop, every diner, every mile marker on Highway 50 like he knew his own reflection. At 47 years old, with over 1,000,000 miles under his belt, Marcus considered himself unshakable. He'd driven through blizzards that turned the world into a white void, navigated black ice that could flip a rig in seconds, and pushed through exhaustion that made the road shimmer like water. Nothing rattled him anymore, or so he thought until that October night when the highway decided to break every rule he'd ever known. The run started normal enough. Marcus left Kansas City at 6 in the evening, his Peterbilt loaded with automotive parts destined for a distribution center in Colorado. The weather report promised clear skies, and his CB radio crackled with the usual chatter from other drivers making their nightly runs. He grabbed coffee at his regular stop in Salina, exchanged waves with Betty, who'd been working the counter for as long as he'd been driving this route, and merged back onto the highway with 8 hours of driving ahead of him. By 10 o'clock, Marcus had crossed into Colorado, and the traffic had thinned to almost nothing. The October moon hung fat and yellow in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty plains. His GPS showed him making good time, and he was already thinking about the breakfast he'd grab in Denver before catching some sleep at his usual motel. The radio had gone quiet, which wasn't unusual for this stretch. Most truckers had either stopped for the night or were on different routes. Marcus didn't mind the silence. After 12 years, it felt like an old friend. That's when he passed the green minivan for the first time. It was pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in a steady rhythm. A woman stood beside it, waving her arms at Marcus as he approached. His headlights caught her face clearly, a middle-aged woman with dark hair, wearing a red jacket. Marcus had a strict policy about stopping for stranded motorists, especially at night and especially alone. He'd radio it in to the highway patrol instead. He reached for his CB radio and noted the mile marker, 267, as he passed the van. 10 minutes later, he passed the same green minivan at mile marker 267. Same woman, same red jacket, same frantic waving. Marcus felt his grip tighten on the steering wheel. He checked his odometer, confirming he'd driven exactly 10 miles since the first sighting. He looked at his GPS, which showed him progressing normally along Highway 50. But there was the van again in the exact same position, the woman making the exact same gestures. He grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, this is Red Wolf. Anybody got ears on?" Only static answered him. Marcus told himself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a different minivan. Maybe his odometer was malfunctioning. Maybe he was more tired than he realized and had imagined the first encounter. He made a mental note of the time, 10:37, and kept driving, his eyes flicking between the road and his instruments more frequently now. 10 minutes later, he passed the green minivan again. Mile marker 267. Same woman, same desperate waving. The coffee in Marcus's stomach turned to ice. He'd driven exactly 10 miles again according to his odometer. His GPS still showed forward progress, but there was no mistaking it now. Same license plate on the van, XKR 7739. Same dent on the rear bumper. Same woman in the red jacket, frozen in the exact same moment of waving, as if time itself had been captured and replayed. Marcus pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing his rig up to 75 miles per hour. The Peterbilt's engine roared, and the white lines on the highway blurred into a solid streak. He needed to break whatever this was to push through to the other side of this impossible loop. His hands were sweating now, leaving damp prints on the steering wheel. The rational part of his mind screamed that this couldn't be happening, that there had to be an explanation, but the primal part, the part that still believed in things that lurked in the dark, knew better. 10 minutes later, mile marker 267 appeared in his headlights again. The green minivan. The woman in red, XKR 7739. Marcus slammed on his brakes, bringing the fully loaded truck to a shuddering stop in the middle of the highway. His breathing came in short, sharp gasps. He looked in his mirrors, expecting to see something, anything that would explain this. The highway stretched empty behind him, illuminated by his running lights. He looked forward. The minivan sat there, hazard lights blinking, but now the woman had turned to face him directly. She wasn't waving anymore. She was just standing there, staring at his truck. He grabbed his phone. No signal. The GPS showed his location as a pulsing blue dot on Highway 50, but something was wrong with it now. The map around his location had gone blank, replaced by a gray void. The clock on his dashboard read 10:57. He'd been in the loop for exactly 20 minutes, living the same 10-mile stretch over and over. Marcus put the truck in gear and drove forward slowly this time, past the minivan and the watching woman. As he passed, he forced himself to look at her face. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark, reflecting his headlights like an animal's eyes would. Her red jacket didn't move in the wind. Nothing about her moved except those eyes tracking his truck as he rolled past. He drove exactly at the speed limit, watching his odometer tick away the miles. Mile marker 268, 269, 270. Maybe he'd broken through. Maybe whatever had caught him had finally let go. But at mile marker 277, exactly 10 miles from where he'd stopped, he saw them. Dozens of green minivans, all identical, all pulled over on the shoulder. And standing between them, hundreds of figures in red jackets, all standing perfectly still, all watching the road. Marcus's scream caught in his throat. He floored the accelerator, the Peterbilt's engine howling as he blasted past the impossible sight. The figures didn't move, didn't react, just stood there in their perfect stillness, their animal eyes glinting in his lights. His speedometer climbed past 80, past 90, the truck shaking with the speed, the load in the trailer shifting and groaning. And then, like passing through a membrane, everything changed. The night seemed to take a breath. Marcus's CB radio exploded with chatter, multiple voices talking over each other. His phone chimed with a flood of delayed notifications. The GPS map filled in again, showing normal highway details. A semi-truck passed him going the opposite direction, the driver giving him a friendly flash of his lights. Marcus looked at his dashboard clock. 11:03. He'd lost over 30 minutes. He pulled into the first rest stop he saw, his whole body shaking so badly he could barely work the air brakes. 3 other trucks were parked there, their drivers presumably sleeping in their cabs. Marcus sat in his seat for 20 minutes, trying to slow his racing heart, trying to convince himself he'd hallucinated the whole thing, that exhaustion or carbon monoxide or something had caused a break from reality. But when he finally calmed down enough to check his trip log, the numbers didn't lie. His odometer showed he'd traveled 73 miles since leaving Salina, but his GPS showed he'd covered 112. Those missing 39 miles existed somewhere, in some version of Highway 50 that shouldn't exist, where a woman in a red jacket, green minivan at mile marker 267, forever waving at passing trucks, forever trying to lure them into the loop. Marcus finished his run to Denver, delivered his load, and immediately put in for a route change. He never drove Highway 50 at night again. Sometimes, when he talks to other truckers at rest stops, he hears stories. Stories about loops and missing time, about mile markers that repeat, about figures on the side of the road that aren't quite human. He doesn't share his own story anymore. People think you're crazy when you tell them the highway can trap you, that the road itself can become a cage. But Marcus knows the truth. Somewhere on Highway 50, between mile marker 267 and 277, there's a place where the rules don't apply, where time bends back on itself like a snake eating its tail. And the woman in the red jacket is still there, still waiting, still waving at trucks that pass in the night, hoping one will stop, hoping one will join her in the eternal loop where 10 miles last forever and escape is just a cruel illusion that repeats every 10 minutes. Story 2. The Shadow in the Trailer. Jennifer Rodriguez had been hauling refrigerated cargo for 6 years, specializing in cross-country runs that paid well but demanded long hours alone on the road. At 32, she'd built a reputation for reliability, never missing a delivery window, never damaging cargo. Her white Kenworth with its gleaming refrigerated trailer was her pride, and she maintained it meticulously. The refrigeration unit hummed constantly, keeping whatever she hauled at precisely controlled temperatures. Usually, it was food products, pharmaceuticals, or other temperature-sensitive goods. She dehauled everything from ice cream to insulin, from frozen fish to vaccine shipments. The job was solitary but honest, and Jennifer had never had reason to fear her cargo until the night she picked up a load in Baton Rouge that changed everything. The manifest listed the cargo as medical research specimens, destination Seattle. The pickup location was a nondescript warehouse on the industrial side of Baton Rouge, the kind of place that didn't advertise its business. Jennifer had picked up medical cargo before, usually packed in special containers with biohazard labels and documentation. This shipment came in 20 sealed white containers, each about the size of a large cooler, stacked neatly on pallets. The warehouse supervisor, a thin man named Carl with nervous hands, seemed eager to get the trailer loaded and Jennifer on her way. "Keep it at exactly 37 degrees, Carl told her, handing over the papers. "Not 36, not 38, exactly 37. The monitoring system will alert you if it deviates." Jennifer had nodded, used to specific temperature requirements. What struck her as odd was the way Carl kept glancing at the sealed trailer, like he was relieved to see the containers disappearing behind the doors. But she'd learned not to ask too many questions. Cargo was cargo, and her job was to deliver it safely and on time. The first 2 days of the drive were completely normal. Jennifer made her way through Louisiana, into Texas, and up through New Mexico. The refrigeration unit hummed its constant song, and the temperature display on her dashboard showed a steady 37 degrees. She stopped at familiar truck stops, caught sleep in her cab, and made good time on her route. The cargo sat silent in the trailer behind her, whatever medical specimens were in those white containers staying perfectly preserved in their climate-controlled environment. On the third night, somewhere in rural Utah, Jennifer woke to the sound of the refrigeration unit cycling off and on repeatedly. The dashboard display flickered between 37 degrees and error messages. She'd never had problems with this unit before. She pulled into a rest area and walked around to check the trailer. Everything looked normal. The unit was running, cold air was flowing, and the external temperature gauge read 37 degrees exactly. She chalked it up to a sensor glitch and went back to sleep. That's when she heard the thumping. It came from inside the trailer, 3 deliberate knocks like someone rapping their knuckles against the interior wall. Jennifer sat up in her bunk, heart pounding. She told herself it was the cargo shifting, containers settling as the refrigeration cycled. But deep down, she knew the sound of shifting cargo, and this wasn't it. This was rhythmic, purposeful. Knock, knock, knock. She grabbed her flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The parking area was deserted, just her truck and one other rig 50 yards away, its driver presumably asleep. The October air was cold, and Jennifer's breath came out in visible puffs. She walked to the back of the trailer, pressed her ear against the cold metal doors. Silence. Jennifer stood there for 5 minutes listening. Nothing. She was starting to feel foolish when she heard it again, but this time from the front of the trailer, right behind the cab. 3 knocks, clear and... She rushed back to that section, but again, silence greeted her. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She drove through the darkness, radio turned up loud, trying to ignore the occasional sounds from the trailer. Sometimes it was knocking. Sometimes it was a dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Once she could have sworn she heard breathing through the vents that connected the trailer to the cab's climate controls. By the time the sun came up, Jennifer had convinced herself she was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. She'd been pushing too hard, sleeping too little. The mind played tricks in the deep hours of the night. She stopped for breakfast at a diner, sat in a booth with other truckers, and felt the normalcy of the world seep back into her bones. But when she returned to her truck and checked the trailer temperature, the display showed 37 degrees with a new message she'd never seen before: interior motion detected. Her trailer had motion sensors as part of its security system, designed to alert her if someone broke in and tried to steal cargo. But the trailer had been locked the entire time, the seal unbroken. She walked around it again in the bright morning light, checking every inch. No signs of forced entry. No damage. The seal was intact. Jennifer called the warehouse in Baton Rouge. Carl answered on the first ring. "My motion sensors are going off," she said. "Is there anything about this cargo I should know?" The silence on the other end stretched too long. "Carl, the specimens are completely sealed," he finally said. "There's no way anything could be moving. It's probably just a sensor malfunction." "What kind of specimens are they exactly?" Another pause. "That's proprietary information. Just get them to Seattle. Keep the temperature at 37 degrees. He hung up. Jennifer stood in the parking lot, phone in her hand, every instinct screaming at her to open the trailer and check the cargo. But breaking the seal would violate her contract, could cost her the job, maybe her entire career. And what would she find? Medical specimens in sealed containers, exactly like the manifest said. She was letting fear get the better of her. She drove. The sounds continued as day turned to night again. Now she could hear them even over the radio, even over the engine noise. Thumping from inside the trailer, dragging sounds. And once clearly, a sound like fingernails scraping against metal. The interior motion sensor alert appeared every few hours, and the temperature fluctuated now, swinging between 36 and 38 degrees despite the refrigeration unit working overtime. So, Idaho, Jennifer pulled into an abandoned rest stop, one that had been closed for years but still had a gravel parking area. She couldn't take it anymore. She had to know what was in those containers. She walked to the back of the trailer, bolt cutters in hand, ready to break the seal and face whatever consequences came. That's when she saw the shadow. Through the small ventilation gaps at the top of the trailer, she could see movement inside. Something was blocking the light from her flashlight, creating a shadow that moved with disturbing fluidity. It wasn't the shadow of containers shifting. It was the shadow of something tall, something that moved like it was walking upright, pacing the length of the trailer. Jennifer backed away, her breath coming in terrified gasps. Whatever was in those containers, it wasn't in the containers anymore. It was loose in the trailer, walking around, knocking on the walls, scraping its fingers against the metal. She should have abandoned the truck right then. She should have called the police, called the company, called anyone. But fear and shock drove her back into the cab and instinct took over. She drove. She drove through the night, pushing toward Seattle, her eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something tear through the wall that separated the cab from the trailer. The sounds grew more frequent, more aggressive. The whole trailer would shake sometimes, like something was throwing itself against the walls. The temperature alarm blared constantly now, the system unable to maintain the required 37 degrees. And through the vents, Jennifer could smell something, a chemical scent mixed with something organic, something that reminded her of hospitals and morgues. She reached Seattle just after dawn, having driven for 18 hours straight. The delivery location was another anonymous warehouse, this one surrounded by high fences and security cameras. Jennifer pulled up to the gate, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone to call the contact number. Men in white hazmat suits emerged from the building. They moved with practiced efficiency, unsealing the trailer, backing a specialized vehicle up to it. Jennifer sat in her cab, watching through her mirror as they entered the trailer. She heard shouts, saw them moving quickly, urgently. One of the white containers was open, its lid torn off from the inside. The others were intact, but whatever had been in that one container was gone or hiding or waiting. A man in a suit approached her window, not wearing a hazmat suit. He handed her an envelope without a word. Inside was payment for the delivery, plus an additional $50,000 in a cashier's check. Disclosure agreement that used words like national security and federal prosecution. Jennifer signed it. She took the money. She never asked what had been in that trailer, what had broken out of its container somewhere in Utah, what had spent 2 days and nights pacing her trailer, knocking on the walls, trying to find a way into the cab where she huddled behind a thin metal wall. She quit long-haul trucking a month later. The sounds still haunt her dreams, the thumping, the dragging, the scraping. Sometimes she wakes up convinced she can smell that chemical organic scent, and she has to turn on every light in her apartment to convince herself she's safe, that whatever was in that trailer is contained now, studied, locked away in some facility where it can't hurt anyone. But sometimes, late at night, she wonders. She wonders how many other trucks are out there on the highways, hauling cargo that isn't quite what the manifest says. She wonders how many other drivers have heard sounds from their trailers that shouldn't be there, seen shadows that don't make sense, smelled things that fill them with primal terror. And she wonders if the thing in her trailer made it to wherever it was supposed to go, or if somewhere between Baton Rouge and Seattle, in some forgotten rest stop or dark stretch of highway, it found a way out. Found a way to walk the roads at night, looking for new containers to hide in, new trucks to haunt, new drivers to terrorize with its impossible presence. Jennifer doesn't drive anymore. She doesn't even like riding in cars. Because once you know that some cargo isn't cargo at all, once you know that the sealed trailer behind you might contain something that should never have been sealed away in the first place, the highway stops being a place of honest work and becomes something else entirely. It becomes a corridor for nightmares, a transportation system for horrors that travel in temperature-controlled darkness, waiting for the right moment to remind you that some things should never be shipped, never be studied, never be disturbed from whatever dark place they came from. The $50,000 sits in Jennifer's bank account untouched. Blood money, she calls it, though she's not sure any blood was actually spilled. But something was paid for with that money, some silence bought, some truth buried. And late at night, when she can't sleep, she takes out the non-disclosure agreement and reads it again, looking for clues in the legal language, trying to understand what she carried across the country, what shared her trailer for those terrible 3 days. The document never uses the word specimen. It never uses the word medical. It uses terms like classified material and sensitive cargo and proprietary research assets. And Jennifer realizes that whatever knocked on her trailer walls, whatever paced in the darkness behind her, whatever broke out of its white container somewhere in the desert, it was never supposed to exist at all. It was something someone created, something someone studied, something that proved too dangerous or too alive or too aware to keep contained. And now it's out there somewhere in a world that has no idea such things are possible. Story 3. The diesel stop that wasn't there. Ray Patterson had a photographic memory for truck stops. After 23 years of cross-country hauling, he could tell you every fuel station, every restaurant, every rest area on every major highway in the lower 48 states. He knew which stops had the cleanest showers, which diners served the best coffee, which parking lots to avoid because they were too easy for thieves. His mental map of America's trucking infrastructure was more detailed than any GPS system, and he took pride in that knowledge. It was what made him good at his job, what kept him efficient, safe, and profitable. So when Ray pulled into a truck stop that he knew, with absolute certainty, did not exist, his carefully ordered understanding of the world began to unravel. The night started normally enough. Ray was hauling electronics from Houston to Minneapolis, running Interstate 35 through the heart of America. He'd driven this route hundreds of times, knew every town, every exit, every curve in the road. It was November, and an early winter storm had dumped 8 inches of snow across Oklahoma and Kansas, slowing traffic to a crawl. By the time Ray crossed into Kansas, he was running 4 hours behind schedule, and his fuel gauge was dropping faster than he liked. He'd planned to fuel up at the Flying J in Wichita, but the storm had other ideas. Traffic on I-35 was moving at 20 miles per hour, and Ray's mental calculations told him he wouldn't make it to Wichita before running dangerously low on fuel. He needed to stop sooner, but he knew this stretch of highway intimately. There was nothing between his current location and Wichita, just empty prairie and small towns with no truck-friendly fuel stations. That's when he saw the sign, "Diesel stop next exit open 24 hours. Ray frowned. There was no diesel stop at this exit. He'd driven past this exact spot at least 200 times. Exit 47, nothing but a county road that led to a small farming community, no services for commercial trucks. But the sign was there, clear as day, illuminated by his headlights, promising fuel and amenities. He almost drove past it. Every instinct told him the sign was wrong, maybe new, maybe advertising a station that had just opened. But his fuel gauge worried him more than his confusion, and the snow was getting heavier. If a new truck stop had opened, that was good news for drivers on this route. Ray took the exit. The off-ramp curved away from the highway, descending into darkness that seemed thicker than it should be. Ray's headlights illuminated snow-covered pavement and nothing else. No streetlights, no buildings, just the road and the falling snow. He drove for half a mile, expecting the station to appear, but seeing nothing. Then, as if materializing out of the storm itself, the truck stop emerged from the darkness. It was huge, bigger than most stations Ray had seen. A sprawling complex of fuel pumps, a large main building that glowed with warm light, and a parking area that could accommodate 50 trucks easily. The sign above the main building read Crossroads Diesel in bright red letters. Ray had never heard of that chain, but the sight of the place filled him with relief. Fuel, hot coffee, maybe a chance to wait out the worst of the storm. The parking lot was empty. Not just mostly empty, completely deserted. No other trucks, no cars, nothing. In the middle of a snowstorm on a major trucking route, a huge truck stop stood completely vacant. Ray felt the first tickle of unease, but he was committed now. His fuel gauge showed less than a quarter tank, and he had no idea how far back he'd have to drive to find another station. He pulled up to the pumps. The diesel islands were modern, with new equipment and clear price displays. The numbers on the pump showed fuel prices that seemed reasonable. Everything looked normal, except for the complete absence of any other human being. Ray climbed out of his cab, the snow stinging his face. The wind howled across the empty lot, but otherwise the world was eerily silent. No highway noise, even though I-35 should have been less than a mile away. No sound from the building, no hum of generators or refrigeration units, just the wind and the falling snow. He walked to the pump and grabbed the diesel nozzle. It felt real, solid, cold. He swiped his company fuel card in the reader. The machine beeped, asked for his odometer reading, went through its normal sequence. Ray entered the information and the pump authorized. He began fueling his truck, watching the numbers climb on the display, watching the gauge in his truck slowly. While the tank filled, Ray looked around. The main building's windows glowed with light, but he couldn't see any movement inside. The signs advertised hot food, coffee, showers, all the usual truck stop amenities. A smaller sign by the entrance read, "Drivers welcome, open 24/7. The pump clicked off. Ray's tank was full. The display showed he'd pumped 143 gallons and the price seemed normal. He replaced the nozzle and looked at the building. He should go inside, use the bathroom at least, maybe grab coffee for the road. But something felt profoundly wrong about this place. The emptiness wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Even in the middle of a snowstorm, there should be someone here. An attendant, another driver, anyone. Ray walked toward the building. His boots crunched in the fresh snow, leaving the only footprints in the pristine parking lot. He reached the glass doors and pulled. They opened easily. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of coffee and diesel and something else, something faint and unpleasant that he couldn't quite identify. The interior was fully stocked and lit. Aisles of snacks and supplies, a hot food counter with heat lamps glowing over empty trays, a coffee station with fresh pots brewing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A radio somewhere played country music at low volume. Everything looked like a normal truck stop, except there was no one behind the counter. No one anywhere. "Hello," Ray called out. His voice echoed in the empty space. No response. He walked through the store, checking the aisles, looking for any sign of staff or customers. The merchandise on the shelves looked normal, products he recognized, prices that seemed reasonable. The hot food counter had serving utensils laid out, napkins stacked neatly, but no food. The coffee was fresh, he could tell by the smell. Ray walked behind the counter into the area where employees should be. A register sat there, its screen glowing with the idle display. A jacket hung on a hook like someone had just stepped away. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a paper plate, the bread still soft, not dried out. Someone had been here recently, maybe minutes ago. "Hello, is anyone here?" "I need to pay for fuel." Still no response. The country music played on. The coffee continued to brew. The lights hummed their electric song. Ray felt his skin crawling. This was wrong. All of this was profoundly, deeply wrong. He noticed a door behind the counter marked office. Ray pushed it open. Inside was a small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a security monitor showing feeds from cameras around the property. Ray looked at it. He could see his truck at the pump. He could see the empty parking lot. He could see himself standing in the store, looking at the security monitors captured by the camera behind the counter. But in one of the camera feeds, the one showing the parking lot from a different angle, he saw something that made his blood freeze. There were trucks in the lot, dozens of them, and people moving between the pumps and the building. The parking lot was full, bustling with activity. Ray spun around and ran to the window. The lot outside was still empty, just his truck and the falling snow. He looked back at the monitor. It showed a busy truck stop, vehicles and people everywhere, everything normal. He was seeing two versions of the same place, one empty and wrong, one full and normal, but both existing at the same time. Ray backed out of the office, his mind reeling. He needed to leave, needed to get back to his truck and drive away from this impossible place. He didn't care about paying for the fuel anymore. He just needed to leave. As he turned to go, he noticed something on the counter he'd missed before. A logbook, the old-fashioned paper kind that drivers used to keep before electronic logs became mandatory. Ray picked it up, flipped it open. The entries were recent, from drivers who'd stopped here. Names, dates, odometer readings. The last entry was from 3 days ago. A driver named Mike Chen, hauling produce to Omaha. Below his entry, in different handwriting, someone had written, "Mike never made it to Omaha. Truck found abandoned on I-35, no sign of driver." Ray's hands shook as he flipped through more pages. Entry after entry, and below many of them, notes about drivers disappearing, trucks found empty, families left wondering. This place wasn't a truck stop. It was a trap, a snare, something that appeared to catch the unwary and desperate. He dropped the logbook and ran for the door. The glass doors seemed farther away than they should be, the distance stretching as he ran. The country music got louder, the lights brighter, the smell of coffee mixing with that unpleasant odor he'd noticed before, stronger now, the smell of decay and rot and wrongness. Ray hit the doors hard, bursting out into the cold night. The snow hit his face like a slap, waking him from the nightmare of that warm, empty building. He ran to his truck, yanked open the door, climbed into the cab. His hands fumbled with the keys, finally getting the engine started. The Peterbilt roared to life and Ray slammed it into gear. He drove out of that parking lot faster than he should have, the trailer swaying dangerously on the snow-covered pavement. The exit ramp back to I-35 was right. Ray took it, accelerating up onto the highway, putting distance between himself and that impossible place. 5 miles down the road, he pulled over, shaking too hard to drive safely. He sat in his cab, engine idling, trying to make sense of what had happened. He grabbed his phone to check his GPS history, to prove to himself that he'd actually exited the highway, actually stopped at that place. His GPS showed no deviation from I-35. According to his electronic log, he'd never exited the highway at all. But his fuel gauge showed a full tank, and when he checked his fuel card transactions online, there was a charge. 143 gallons of diesel purchased at 11:47 p.m. at a location listed only as unknown station exit 47. Ray didn't report what happened. Who would believe him? Instead, he drove straight through to Minneapolis, delivered his load, and immediately started researching. He found stories online, posted in dark corners of trucking forums, stories from other drivers who'd stopped at places that shouldn't exist, truck stops that appeared in storms, rest areas that showed up on empty stretches of highway, diesel stations that existed in some other version of reality, places where the boundary between what is and what should be had worn thin. And Ray found the disappearances. Drivers who'd vanished over the years, their trucks found abandoned, their last known locations often in empty stretches of highway where their GPS logs showed no stops, but their fuel records showed purchases at stations that didn't exist. Ray drives more carefully now. He plans his fuel stops meticulously, never letting his tank drop low enough that desperation might override caution. He's seen that red Crossroads diesel sign twice more over the years, always in bad weather, always when he's running low on fuel. Each time he drives past, choosing to risk running empty rather than take that exit again. Because Ray knows the truth now. There are places on the highway that aren't really there, places that exist in the cracks of the world, waiting for desperate drivers. They offer what you need, fuel or rest or shelter, but they take something in return. Sometimes they take time. Sometimes they take sanity. And sometimes, if the logbook he found is accurate, they take the driver entirely, pulling them into whatever version of reality those places occupy, leaving nothing behind but an abandoned truck and unanswered questions. Ray's photographic memory for truck stops is different now. He remembers not just what exists, but what shouldn't exist. He remembers the Crossroads diesel at exit 47, the place that appears and disappears, the place that exists in his fuel records but not on any map. He remembers the empty parking lot and the full parking lot, existing simultaneously, separated by nothing more than the thin barrier of a camera lens. And he remembers the logbook, those names of drivers who stopped at the crossroads and never made it to their destinations. Ray adds to that list in his mind every time he hears about a driver disappearing, every time a truck is found abandoned with no explanation. He wonders if they saw that red sign, if they took that exit, if they walked into that warm, empty building and found something waiting for them that he was lucky enough to escape. The highway has secrets, Ray knows now. It has places that exist in shadows and storms, places that offer help to the desperate and extract a price that no one should have to pay. And every time Ray drives past exit 47, he checks his fuel gauge, makes sure he has plenty to get to the next real stop, the next place that exists in the solid world where truck stops stay in one reality and logbooks don't record the names of the disappeared. Story 4. The Passenger Who Leaves. Tom Bradley had broken his #1 rule: never pick up hitchhikers. After 15 years driving trucks, he'd seen enough to know that stopping for strangers was asking for trouble. But the girl had looked so desperate, standing in the rain on the shoulder of Highway 70 in Kansas, soaking wet and shivering in the headlights of his Freightliner. It was 2 in the morning, the temperature dropping toward freezing, and Tom's conscience wouldn't let him drive past. He told himself he'd drop her at the next town, just a few miles down the road. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. She climbed into the cab without a word, water dripping from her dark hair and cheap jacket. Tom guessed she was in her early 20s, pale skin, thin frame, eyes that seemed too large for her face. She settled into the passenger seat and stared straight ahead through the windshield, not acknowledging Tom's attempts at conversation. "Name S. Tom," he tried. "Where you headed?" Silence. "Look, I can take you to Colby. It's about 20 miles up the road. There's a bus station there, should be open early morning." Still nothing. The girl just stared forward, her wet hair plastering to her face, water pooling on the seat beneath her. Tom gave up on conversation and focused on driving. The rain hammered against the windshield and the wipers struggled to keep up. He'd drop her in Colby, make sure she got inside somewhere safe, back on schedule. His load of agricultural equipment wasn't time-sensitive, and helping someone in need seemed like the right thing to do, even if she wasn't friendly. After 10 minutes of silence, Tom glanced over at his passenger. She was still staring straight ahead, completely motionless. Not fidgeting, not adjusting her wet clothes, not even blinking as far as he could tell. The water had stopped dripping from her hair and jacket, but she looked just as wet as when she'd climbed in. "You okay?" Tom asked. The girl's head turned toward him with mechanical precision. No natural movement of the neck and shoulders, just the head swiveling like it was on a gimbal. Her eyes locked onto his, and Tom felt ice flood his veins. Her eyes were completely black, no whites, no iris, just solid black orbs that reflected his dashboard lights like glass. "Keep driving," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to stop the truck and get her out, but a deeper, more primal fear kept him driving. Those eyes, God, those eyes weren't human, weren't right, weren't possible. "I'm going to drop you in Colby," Tom managed, his voice shaking. "No," the girl said. "Keep driving, don't stop. Listen, I don't want any trouble, I'm just trying to help, keep driving." Her voice had no inflection, no emotion. It was like listening to a computer speak, or we'll have an accident. The threat was clear despite the flat delivery. Tom looked at the road, then back at the girl. She turned to face forward again, that mechanical swivel of her head, and was staring at the highway ahead. Tom's mind raced. He could pull over, force her out. He could radio for help. The truck lurched violently to the left. Tom hadn't touched the wheel, but the Freightliner was veering across the highway toward the oncoming lane. He grabbed the wheel and pulled right, correcting the truck's course, his heart hammering. What the hell had just happened? A tire blowout, a steering malfunction. "Keep driving," the girl repeated. "Don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't try to remove me." Tom drove. What else could he do? He was trapped in his own truck with something that looked like a girl but wasn't, something that could apparently control his vehicle, something with eyes like holes in reality. He thought about his wife, Sarah, waiting for him at home in Missouri. He thought about his daughter, Emma, starting college this year. He thought about all the times he'd driven past hitchhikers without a second thought, and he cursed his moment of compassion. The rain continued. The miles passed. The girl sat motionless beside him, occasionally turning that mechanical head to look at him with those impossible eyes, then swiveling back to face forward. She never blinked, never shifted position. The wet patches on her clothes and the seat never dried, despite the truck's heater running full blast. Tom drove through Colby without stopping, though his mind screamed at him to pull into a gas station, a police station, anywhere with people and lights. But he remembered the truck lurching, remembered the threat in that emotionless voice, and he kept driving. "What do you want?" he finally asked as they crossed into Colorado, dawn still hours away. The girl didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice remained that same flat monotone. To ride, to go, to be driven. Where? Where do you want to go? Everywhere, nowhere, the road, just the road. Tom's blood ran cold. I have to stop eventually. I have to sleep, fuel up, deliver my load. No stops, the girl said. Keep driving. I'll run out of fuel. The truck will stop whether I want it to or not. The girl's head swiveled toward him again. Look at your fuel gauge. Tom glanced down. The gauge showed 3/4 full, but that was impossible. He'd been driving for over 2 hours since picking her up, and the gauge had been at half full when she climbed in. The needle should have dropped, not risen. What are you? Tom whispered. A passenger, she said. Keep driving. The sun rose eventually, pale light filtering through the rainstorm that had followed them across Kansas and into Colorado. Tom had been driving for 6 hours straight, and his fuel gauge still showed 3/4 full. He wasn't tired, despite not sleeping. He wasn't hungry, despite not eating. His body felt disconnected, like he was watching himself drive from outside his own skin. Other vehicles appeared on the highway as morning traffic picked up. Tom considered trying to signal them, to get help somehow. But what would he say? There's a hitchhiker in my truck who won't leave. She had done nothing overtly threatening besides that one moment when the truck had lurched. To anyone looking in, she just appeared to be a passenger, wet and quiet but otherwise normal. They couldn't see her eyes from outside the cab. Tom tried his CB radio, static. He tried his phone. No signal, even though he'd had full bars before picking up the girl. Every method of communication was dead, leaving him isolated in his own truck, trapped with this thing that pretended to be human. Why me? Tom asked as they drove through the Rockies, the rain finally letting up. Why did you get in my truck? You stopped, the girl said. You let me in, that's the agreement. What agreement? I didn't agree to anything. For the first time, something that might have been emotion flickered across the girl. The corners of her mouth twitched upward in what could have been a smile, but the expression was wrong, the muscles moving in ways that human muscles shouldn't move. You stopped. You opened the door. You invited me in. That's all the agreement needed. Tom's mind reeled. This was like some twisted fairy tale, some dark legend about creatures that couldn't enter unless invited. He opened the door. He told her to get in out of the rain, and somehow in doing so he'd bound himself to this thing. How do I make you leave? Tom asked desperately. You can't. I leave when I'm done riding. When will that be? The not smile remained on the girl's face. I've been riding for a long time. I'm not done yet. Tom drove through that day and into the next night. The fuel gauge never dropped below 3/4. His body never tired. The girl never moved except for those mechanical swivels of her head. They crossed Colorado, entered Utah, drove through desert and mountain without stopping. Tom's electronic log should have been screaming violations, forcing him to stop for mandatory rest. But it showed only 2 hours of drive time, no matter how long he'd actually been driving. On the second night, Tom saw other trucks on the highway, and in the glow of their running lights, he saw passengers in some of the cabs. Passengers who sat too still, stared too blankly, had something wrong about their silhouettes. And he understood. He wasn't the only one. There were other drivers out there, trapped in their own cabs, driving endlessly with passengers who wouldn't leave, couldn't leave. Passengers who existed in the spaces between things, feeding on the act of travel itself. There are others, Tom said. It wasn't a question. Many others, the girl confirmed. The road is long. We need riders to carry us. Forever, I just drive forever. Until your truck stops, until your body stops, until the road itself stops. Tom felt tears on his face. He thought of Sarah waiting for him, wondering why he hadn't called, why he'd missed his delivery window, why he seemed to have vanished. He thought of Emma, who'd never know what happened to her father. He thought of growing old in this cab, his body somehow sustained by whatever dark magic let the fuel gauge stay full, driving until his heart finally gave out or the truck fell apart beneath him. But Tom Bradley hadn't survived 15 years on the road without learning to think strategically. The girl had said, until your truck stops. Not you can never stop, but until the truck stops. There might be a difference there, a loophole in whatever agreement he'd unwittingly made. As they drove through Nevada, Tom began to plan. He couldn't stop the truck himself. The girl had made that clear. What if the truck stopped on its own? Not from running out of fuel, which apparently wouldn't happen, but from something else. He started listening to his Freightliner more carefully, feeling for any sign of mechanical trouble. The engine ran smoothly, too smoothly perhaps, sustained by the same force that kept the fuel tank full. The tires hummed against the pavement, never losing air, never wearing down. Everything about the truck felt locked in stasis, preserved in the moment he'd picked up the passenger. But Tom knew trucks, knew them intimately. And he knew that even the best-maintained vehicle had limits. If he couldn't stop the truck, maybe he could break it. Maybe if the truck broke down, stopped running through mechanical failure rather than his choice, the agreement would break with it. Tom began to push the engine. He accelerated on flat ground, forced the truck to work harder than necessary. He downshifted when he should have upshifted, creating strain. He took turns faster than he should, stressing the suspension and steering. Small acts of sabotage that might, over time, cause something to fail. The girl seemed unaware of his plan. She sat in her mechanical stillness, those black eyes staring forward, occasionally swiveling to look at him before turning away. Tom kept driving, kept pushing the truck, kept praying that something would break. On the fourth day, somewhere in Oregon, Tom heard it. A grinding sound from the transmission, faint but unmistakable. The truck had taken all the abuse he'd been inflicting, and something was finally giving way. Tom pushed harder, downshifting aggressively, making the transmission work overtime. The girl's head swiveled toward him. "What are you doing?" "Driving," Tom said. "That's what you wanted." The grinding got louder. The truck began to shudder. Tom kept his foot on the accelerator, kept forcing the dying transmission to engage. The girl's expression changed, the flat effect cracking. For the first time, she looked concerned, almost afraid. "Stop," she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. "You're breaking it." "Can't stop," Tom said, echoing her words back to her. "Have to keep driving." With a sound like a gunshot, the transmission failed completely. The truck lurched, lost power, and began to coast. Tom didn't touch the brakes, let it roll, but they were on an uphill grade and physics took over. The Freightliner slowed, stopped, died. Silence filled the cab. Tom looked at the girl. She was flickering, her solid form becoming translucent, then solid, then translucent again. Her black eyes wide, her mouth open in what might have been surprise or might have been terror. "The agreement," she whispered, her voice fading. "You broke the agreement." "No," Tom said, his voice stronger than he felt. "The truck stopped." "You said until the truck stops." "Well, it stopped." The girl let out a sound that wasn't quite human, a high-pitched keening that made Tom's ears ache. And then she was gone, not climbing out, not fading away gradually, just gone. One moment she was there, the next the passenger seat was empty except for a wet patch that evaporated even as Tom watched. Tom sat in his dead truck on an Oregon highway, shaking, crying, laughing. The silence was beautiful. He was alone, actually alone. He grabbed his phone, full signal. He checked his electronic log. It showed 4 days of driving time, thousands of violations, and a GPS track that wandered across 6 states in an impossible path that his truck couldn't have physically driven. He radioed for a tow truck, called his dispatcher, called Sarah. He tried to explain what happened, but the words sounded insane even to his own ears. A hitchhiker who wouldn't leave. A fuel gauge that never dropped. 4 days of driving without stopping. No one believed him. His company fired him for the log violations. He lost his commercial license. But Tom doesn't care. He's alive. He's home. He's free. The truck was scrapped, the transmission damage too extensive to repair economically. Sometimes Tom wonders if the girl found another ride, if she's sitting in some other driver's cab right now, staring with those black eyes, compelling them to drive forever on roads that never end. He sees hitchhikers sometimes standing in the rain, thumbs out looking desperate. And Tom drives past, always drives past, no matter how much his conscience screams at him, because he knows the truth now. Some passengers aren't looking for a destination. They're looking for the journey itself, endless and eternal, and they need drivers to carry them through the dark spaces between places, where the road goes on forever and the fuel never runs out and the only escape is to break the very thing that binds you. Tom keeps the piece of the destroyed transmission on his desk, a twisted chunk of metal that cost him his career but saved his soul. It reminds him that some agreements are traps, that some passengers aren't human, and that sometimes the only way to stop is to break completely, to destroy the vehicle that carries you before it carries you so far from yourself that you can never find your way back. Story 5. The Way Station Inspection. Carl Morrison had been through hundreds of way station inspections in his 18 years of hauling freight. The routine was always the same. Pull onto the scales, wait for the all clear or the dreaded signal to pull around for inspection, answer questions, show paperwork, maybe get a minor citation if something was slightly off. It was part of the job, boring and bureaucratic. Nothing about the way station on Interstate 80 in Wyoming seemed different when Carl's Mack Anthem rolled onto the scales at 3 in the afternoon on a clear December day. The sign lit up directing him to pull forward for inspection, and Carl sighed, preparing for the delay. He had no idea he was about to face an inspection that would violate every law of physics and sanity he'd ever known. The inspector who approached Carl's truck looked official enough. Dark blue uniform, clipboard, reflective vest, name tag that read T. Morrison. Carl didn't think much of the shared last name. It was common enough. The inspector was a tall man, maybe 40, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "License and registration," the inspector said, his voice flat and formal. Carl handed over his documents. The inspector studied them for a long moment, longer than necessary for a simple check. "Step out of the vehicle," the inspector said. "We're doing a full inspection today." Carl climbed down from his cab, stretching his legs. His trailer contained industrial machinery bound for Salt Lake City. Nothing unusual, all properly secured and documented. He'd been through this before. It would take 30 minutes, maybe an hour, and he'd be back on the road. The inspector walked slowly around the truck, examining the tires, lights, and exterior with meticulous attention. He made notes on his clipboard that Carl couldn't see. Everything seemed normal until the inspector reached the back of the trailer. "Open it," he commanded. Carl unlocked the trailer doors and swung them open. His load was exactly as it should be. 3 large pieces of manufacturing equipment strapped securely to the trailer floor, all the proper padding and protection in place. Carl had loaded it himself 2 days ago in Chicago, and nothing had been touched since. The inspector climbed into the trailer and began examining the cargo. He spent a long time studying the machinery, walking around it, touching it, making more notes. Carl stood outside, checking his watch, growing impatient but knowing better than to rush an official inspection. "This isn't what you loaded," the inspector finally said, still inside the trailer. Carl frowned. "Excuse me, this cargo. It's not what you think you loaded." "Sir, I have all the documentation right here. 3 precision milling machines manufactured by—" "Look at them," the interrupted. "Really look at them." Carl climbed into the trailer, irritated now. He walked up to the nearest machine, the one he'd personally helped load, the one he'd watched the manufacturer's crew carefully secure, and he stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The machine was wrong. Not damaged, not shifted, wrong. The proportions were off. Angles that should have been 90 degrees were slightly skewed. Metal surfaces that should have been flat had subtle curves. It looked like the milling machine, but as if someone had recreated it from memory, getting all the details almost but not quite right. Carl touched the metal surface. It felt wrong too, the temperature fluctuating under his hand, warm then cold then warm again in waves. "What the hell?" Carl whispered. "Check the other two," the inspector said. Carl moved to the second machine. It was even worse. The basic shape was right, but the details were scrambled. Components that should have been on the left were on the right. Control panels had buttons and displays in random arrangements, and the third machine didn't even pretend to be right anymore. It was a twisted amalgamation of parts that hurt to look at, geometry that didn't quite make sense, metal that seemed to fold in directions that three-dimensional space shouldn't allow. "This isn't possible," Carl said, backing toward the trailer exit. "These were normal machines. I loaded normal machines." The inspector climbed out of the trailer and faced Carl. He removed his mirrored sunglasses, and Carl saw that his eyes were wrong too. Not black like the hitchhiker stories he'd heard, but fractured like looking at someone through broken glass, multiple images of the same eye overlapping and shifting. "You didn't load machines," the inspector said. "You loaded approximations, echoes, copies that degraded during transport. It happens on certain routes, certain times when the road goes through thin places." "I don't understand," Carl's voice shook. "Interstate 80 between mile marker 215 and 217 passes through a weak spot. Reality gets thin there and things from other sides bleed through. Sometimes they replace cargo. Sometimes they replace drivers. Sometimes they replace inspectors." The man who looked like an inspector smiled, but the expression was wrong, the mouth moving in ways that faces shouldn't move. "I'm here to document the changes, to record what crosses over." Carl ran. He didn't think, didn't plan, just ran. He sprinted away from his truck, away from the thing pretending to be an inspector, toward the way station building where there should be other people, real people who could help him. The building was empty, not just unstaffed, completely empty. No furniture, no equipment, no signs that anyone had ever worked here. Just bare walls and empty rooms and Carl's panicked breathing echoing in the void. He pulled out his phone. No signal. He ran to the windows that overlooked the scale area where his truck sat. There were dozens of trucks out there now, all of them with their trailers open, all of them being inspected by figures in blue uniforms, all of the drivers standing in small clusters, looking confused and frightened. Carl recognized some of the trucks, had seen them on the highway over the past few hours, had exchanged waves with their drivers on the road. They'd all been pulled in. All of them were being inspected. All of them were finding out that their cargo had changed, had been replaced by approximations and echoes and things that almost but not quite resembled what they'd loaded. Carl watched as the inspector with his fractured eyes moved from truck to truck, documenting the changes, explaining to each terrified driver about thin places and crossovers and reality bleeding. The drivers reacted differently. Some stood in shock. Some argued. Some, like Carl, tried to run. But there was nowhere to run to. The way station existed in its own pocket, cut off from the normal flow of the interstate. Carl could see I-80 in the distance, traffic flowing normally, trucks and cars passing by. But the exit ramp that should have reconnected the way station to the highway just ended. It terminated in empty air, a road to nowhere. Carl spent hours in that building, watching the inspections continue below, watching more trucks get pulled in, watching the inspector or inspectors. Carl couldn't tell if it was one being or many, document each transformed cargo. The sun set and strange lights illuminated the scale area, colors that Carl had no names for, wavelengths that human eyes shouldn't be able to perceive but somehow could in this place. Night fell and Carl finally worked up the courage to go back outside. The inspector was waiting by his truck. "You can't keep us here," Carl said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "We're not keeping you," the inspector replied. "You can leave anytime. Get in your truck, drive away. But you need to understand what you'll be carrying. My cargo is wrong. It's not what I loaded. I can't deliver this. Your cargo has been transformed by passing through the thin place. It's adapted to this reality, or tried to. The machines you loaded are still in Chicago, or rather, they never left. What you have now are interpretations, translations. They'll function approximately but differently. That's insane. None of this is real. The inspector's fractured eyes fixed on Carl. Reality is more flexible than you think, especially on certain stretches of highway at certain times when the barriers between what is and what could be wear thin. You drove through one of those stretches. Your cargo paid the price, or the reward depending on perspective. What happens if I refuse to deliver? You're free to refuse. Leave the trailer here. We'll document it as abandoned cargo. You can walk away, catch a ride with another driver, file a report with your company about theft or loss. But you'll always know the truth. You'll always wonder what would have happened if you delivered the transformed cargo. Carl looked at his trailer, at the impossible machines inside, at the geometry that hurt to observe. He thought about his reputation, his perfect delivery record, his responsibilities. He thought about sanity and reality and all the things he'd always believed were solid and unchanging. If I deliver, then what? Then you complete your route. The recipient will receive the cargo. They may notice the differences, or they may not. Reality has a way of adjusting to accommodate the anomalous. People see what they expect to see most of the time. The machines will work just differently than intended. They'll manufacture parts with interesting properties, unexpected properties, and the world will be slightly stranger for it. And me? You'll be marked. Having passed through the thin place, having seen the transformation, you'll be sensitive to other anomalies. You'll notice when reality doesn't quite line up. You'll see the cracks and the edges and the places where things bleed through. It's a burden and a gift. Carl stood in the strange light of the transformed way station, surrounded by other drivers facing their own impossible choices, and he made his decision. He climbed back into his cab, started his engine, and watched as the road back to I-80 materialized in front of him, solid and real and waiting. He delivered the cargo to Salt Lake City. The receiving crew didn't seem to notice anything wrong with the machines, or if they did, they didn't comment. Carl watched as they unloaded the impossible geometry, the transformed equipment, and he said nothing. He signed the delivery confirmation and drove away. That was 8 months ago. Carl still drives trucks, still hauls cargo across the country. But he sees things now that he never noticed before. He sees the thin places, the stretches of highway where reality gets flexible. He sees mile markers that flicker between numbers. He sees other trucks carrying cargo that doesn't quite match their manifests, drivers with eyes that reflect light in ways human eyes shouldn't. And sometimes, late at night on empty highways, Carl passes way stations that aren't on any map, sees inspectors conducting examinations of cargo that has transformed during transit. He never stops at those stations anymore. Once was enough. Once was more than enough. But he knows they're there, scattered along the interstate system, places where reality gets checked and documented, where transformations are recorded, where the bleeding of one world into another is officially noted and filed away by beings that wear inspector uniforms and carry clipboards and have eyes like broken glass. Carl keeps his own logbook now, separate from the official electronic logs. In it, he marks the thin places, the mile markers where reality gets soft, the stretches of highway to avoid or approach with caution. Other drivers have started asking him about it. Drivers who have seen things they can't explain, hauled cargo that changed during transit, encountered inspectors with fractured eyes. Carl shares what he knows, warns them about the way stations that exist in pockets cut away from normal space and time. He's become something of an unofficial guide to the strange side of trucking, the aspects of the job that don't appear in training manuals or safety seminars. Because the highway system is vast and it connects more than just cities and states. It connects realities, dimensions, possibilities. And sometimes, when you drive through the right stretch of road at the right time, you cross from one version of the world into another. Your cargo transforms. your destination changes, and you have to decide whether to turn back or drive forward into the strangeness. Carl drives forward. He always drives forward now, because once you've seen the truth, once you know that reality is just a suggestion and the thin places are everywhere, you can't unknow it. You can't unsee it. All you can do is keep driving, keep hauling, keep delivering cargo that may or may not be what you loaded, to destinations that may or may not be in the world you started from. And sometimes, on clear December afternoons on Interstate 80 in Wyoming, Carl drives past the way station where his transformation began. It looks normal now, official and bureaucratic and boring. But Carl knows better. He knows that somewhere in the overlap of realities, that way station still exists, still pulls in trucks, still inspects cargo that has passed through the thin places. And the inspector with fractured eyes is still there, clipboard in hand, documenting the bleeding of worlds, recording the transformation, explaining to terrified drivers that reality is more flexible than they ever imagined. Some of those drivers make the choice Carl made, to deliver the transformed cargo, to drive forward into strangeness. Others abandon their trailers and walk away, trying to forget what they saw, though they never quite succeed. Carl wonders sometimes if he made the right choice. Then he looks at his logbook, at all the thin places he's mapped, at all the knowledge he's gained about the flexible nature of reality, and he realizes that right or wrong doesn't matter anymore. He's been transformed just as much as his cargo was, changed by passing through that way station, marked by the inspection. He's a driver of the thin places now, hauling cargo between realities, navigating the stretches of highway where the world bleeds into itself, delivering the transformed and the impossible to destinations that exist in the cracks of reality. It's not the job he signed up for 18 years ago, but it's the job he has now. And Carl drives on through the thin places, through the bleeding edges of reality, through way stations that exist and don't exist, carrying cargo that is and isn't what he loaded, to destinations that wait in the spaces between what is and what could be. The highway stretches endlessly ahead and reality shifts with every mile, and Carl Morrison, marked by transformation, drives forward into the beautiful, terrible strangeness of it all. Story 6. The Convoy That Disappeared. Rachel Kim had been part of convoys before, groups of truckers traveling the same route who coordinated over CB radio for safety and company. It was common practice, especially on long hauls through remote areas. Safety in numbers, someone to talk to during the lonely miles, help available if a truck broke down. So when Rachel picked up the CB chatter from a group of 5 trucks organizing a convoy from Albuquerque to Phoenix, she didn't hesitate to ask if she could join. They welcomed her cheerfully, making her the 6th truck in their group. It seemed like a perfect arrangement for a November night drive through the desert. Rachel had no way of knowing that by sunrise, she would be the only one left. The convoy formed up at a truck stop just outside Albuquerque. Rachel met the other drivers. Big Mike with his vintage Kenworth, Sarah and Tom Jensen, who drove as a husband-wife team in their Volvo, a younger guy named Danny hauling his first cross-country load, and an older driver named Frank who claimed to have driven every highway in America at least. They were friendly, normal, the kind of people Rachel had met 1,000 times in rest stops and diners across the country. They pulled out at 8 p.m., settling into a comfortable formation with Frank leading and Rachel taking up the rear in her Peterbilt. The CB radio came alive with chatter, the usual trucker banter and road updates. Someone told jokes. Someone else complained about the price of diesel. It felt safe and social and completely ordinary. The route took them southwest on I-40, into the desert darkness where cities gave way to empty land and the stars emerged in their full glory. Rachel had driven this route dozens of times, knew its rhythms and landmarks. She settled into the comfortable routine of following the convoy's lights, maintaining proper spacing, listening to the voices on the radio. Around 10 p.m., about 2 hours into the drive, Frank's voice came over the CB. "Anybody else seeing those lights off to the north?" Rachel looked. In the far distance, she could see lights that flickered and moved across the desert floor. Too far away to identify, they could have been vehicles, campfires, equipment from some kind of operation. "Probably mining work," Big Mike suggested. "Lots of mineral operations out here." The convoy continued. The lights in the distance kept pace with them, neither getting closer nor falling behind. Rachel thought it was odd but not alarming. The desert was big and distances were deceptive in the darkness. At 10:30, Danny's voice came through, younger and less certain than the others. "Hey, is it just me or are there more trucks with us now?" Rachel frowned and checked her mirrors. She could see the 5 trucks ahead of her, their lights marking their positions. She counted them off, Frank's rig in the lead, then Big Mike, then Sarah and Tom, then Danny. 5 trucks, same as before. "I count 5, Rachel said into the CB. "Same as when we started." "Look to the left," Danny said. "There's another convoy running parallel to us." Rachel looked. At first, she saw nothing but darkness. Then her eyes adjusted and she saw them. Trucks running without lights, ghostly shapes barely visible against the desert floor, maybe a half-mile to the left, keeping perfect pace with the convoy. "That's weird," Sarah said. "Why would they run dark like that?" "Maybe illegal," Tom suggested. "Smugglers or something. Best to ignore them and mind our own business." The convoy continued, but the chatter on the CB became more subdued. Everyone was aware of the dark trucks now, the silent convoy that matched their speed exactly. Rachel kept glancing over, trying to count how many there were, but the shapes were distinct. Sometimes she thought she saw 5 or 6. Other times it looked like a dozen or more. At 11 p.m., Frank's voice returned to the CB, and it had lost its earlier confidence. "The lights in the north are getting closer." He was right. The flickering lights that had been distant were now clearly approaching, still miles away but definitely closing the gap. Rachel could see them more clearly now, not the steady lights of vehicles but something that pulsed and danced, like flames but more organized, more purposeful. "Maybe we should find a place to pull off," Danny suggested, fear creeping into his young voice. "Wait for whatever that is to pass." "There's a rest area about 20 miles ahead," Frank said. "We'll stop there, assess the situation." But when they reached the spot where the rest area should have been, it wasn't there. The exit sign appeared in Frank's headlights, but the ramp led to nothing, just empty desert. Frank didn't take it and the convoy continued. "That's not right," Frank said. "That rest area's been there for 30 years. Rachel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Something was wrong. The dark convoy to their left was closer now, close enough that she could see they were definitely trucks, big rigs like her own, but running completely silent and lightless. And the approaching lights from the north were close enough that she could see they weren't touching the ground, floating above the desert, bobbing and weaving as they raced toward the highway. "I think we need to break convoy," Big Mike said, his earlier cheerfulness gone. "Split up, get off this highway." "And go where?" Sarah asked. "We're in the middle of nowhere." That's when the dark convoy swerved toward them. It happened suddenly, the lightless trucks turning in unison and accelerating toward I-40. Rachel saw them coming, saw Frank and the others see them too, heard the panic in the voices on the CB. The dark trucks weren't trying to avoid collision, they were aiming for it, closing the distance with impossible speed. "Scatter!" Frank shouted. "Get off the highway!" The convoy broke apart. Frank accelerated and swerved right, taking an exit that Rachel was certain hadn't been there a moment ago. Big Mike hit his brakes and took a left, crossing the median into the westbound lanes. Sarah and Tom's Volvo shot forward, their engine roaring as they tried to outrun the approaching threat. Danny's truck wobbled as he panicked, nearly jackknifing before he regained control and followed Big Mike across the median. Rachel didn't know what to do. The dark convoy was almost on them now, and she could see they weren't quite right. The trucks had the basic shape, the general outline, but the proportions were wrong, like they'd been drawn by someone who'd heard of never actually seen one. The cabs were too tall, the trailers too long, the wheels too many. She chose to accelerate, following Sarah and Tom's lead, pushing her Peterbilt to its limits. In her mirror, she saw the dark trucks reach the highway and merge with the road, still silent, still running without lights. And now she could see there were dozens of them, a massive convoy of wrong trucks filling the highway behind her. The CB radio exploded with static, voices cutting in and out, and under it all a sound that was quite language, a rhythmic pulsing that hurt Rachel's ears. "Frank, Big Mike, anyone," Rachel called into the radio. Only static and that pulsing, not language, answered her. Rachel drove faster. The speedometer climbed past 80, past 90. Her fully loaded truck shook and rattled, but she didn't dare slow down. The dark convoy was gaining, impossibly fast, and the lights from the north were converging on the highway ahead of her. She saw Sarah and Tom's Volvo in the distance, their lights weaving erratically. Then suddenly, they swerved hard left and vanished. Not drove out of sight, vanished. Their lights were there one moment and gone the next, as if they'd driven into a hole in reality. Rachel was alone on the highway now, alone except for the pursuing dark convoy and the approaching lights. She grabbed her CB microphone. "This is Rachel Kim on I-40 mile marker unknown, requesting emergency assistance, multiple vehicles in pursuit." Her GPS screen flickered and died. Her dashboard lights dimmed. The only illumination came from her headlights cutting through the darkness and the terrible glow of the approaching lights from the north. Rachel saw a side road, unpaved but real, and she took it without thinking. Her truck bounced over rough ground, the trailer swaying dangerously, but she kept her foot on the accelerator. The dark convoy couldn't follow, or chose not to. She watched in her mirror as they continued along I-40, a river of impossible trucks flowing through the night. The dirt road wound through the desert for miles. Rachel's hands ached from gripping the wheel, her eyes burned from staring into the darkness, but she kept driving. Eventually, the road intersected with another highway, this one looking normal and real. Rachel pulled onto it, heading south, putting as much distance between herself and I-40 as possible. She drove until dawn, until the sun rose over the desert and burned away the darkness and the fear. She stopped at a small gas station in a town whose name she didn't catch, her whole body shaking from exhaustion. Rachel tried to find the others. She called the numbers they'd exchanged before the convoy formed. Frank's phone was disconnected. Big Mike's went straight to voicemail that was full. Sarah and Tom's number rang and rang without answer. Danny's number connected to a message saying the subscriber was not available. She filed reports with the highway patrol, with her company, with anyone who would listen. Search and rescue teams looked for the missing trucks. They found nothing. No wreckage, no abandoned vehicles, no trace of the 5 trucks and their drivers who'd been part of Rachel's convoy. The official explanation was that Rachel had experienced some kind of breakdown, maybe carbon monoxide poisoning, and hallucinated the entire convoy. The other trucks, the officials said, had never existed. There was no record of them on security cameras at the truck stop in Albuquerque. No fuel purchases under those names. No electronic log entries showing trucks on I-40 that night. But Rachel knows what happened. She has the CB recordings, voices that match no one in any database, talking about lights in the desert and trucks running dark. She has her GPS log showing the hours she drove that night, even though the GPS screen died. She has the memory of Frank and Big Mike and Sarah and Tom and young Danny, real people with real lives who joined a convoy that drove into something they shouldn't have encountered. Rachel doesn't drive I-40 through New Mexico anymore. She takes longer routes, pays for the extra fuel out of her own pocket, accepts the lost time, because she knows the truth. The dark convoy is still out there, running silent and lightless through the desert night, and it's hunting. looking for trucks to join its impossible fleet, looking for drivers to pull into its ranks. And the lights from the north still dance across the desert, approaching the highway where the dark convoy runs, engaged in some eternal chase or ritual that human minds aren't meant to understand. Rachel wonders what happened to the others. Did they join the dark convoy, transformed into those wrong-shaped trucks? Did the lights from the north catch them, pull them into whatever realm those dancing flames came from? Or did they find other roads, other escapes, and they're out there somewhere, too terrified to come forward, too traumatized to speak about what they saw? She'll never know. And maybe that's worse than knowing, worse than certainty. The not knowing haunts her every time she drives at night, every time she sees the distant lights of other trucks, every time someone suggests forming a convoy. Rachel drives alone now, always alone. Because she learned that safety in numbers is an illusion, that sometimes the group becomes the target, that there are things on the highways that hunt convoys specifically, drawn to the formation, the coordination, the human need to travel together through the darkness. And she knows that somewhere on I-40, on certain November nights when the desert holds its breath and the stars burn cold and bright, a convoy forms up at a truck stop outside Albuquerque. 6 trucks, friendly drivers, the promise of company and safety on a long night drive through empty country. And by sunrise, there are only 5 trucks left, or 4, or none. The dark convoy grows larger every year, Rachel thinks. More wrong-shaped trucks running silent through the night, carrying drivers who thought safety lay in numbers, who thought the highway was just a highway, who thought the darkness held nothing worse than loneliness and fatigue. Rachel knows better now. She drives alone, keeps her CB radio on the emergency channel, watches for lights that dance and flicker where lights shouldn't be. And when other truckers suggest forming a convoy, Rachel politely declines. She doesn't explain why. How could she make anyone understand that some invitations lead not to safety, but to transformation? That some convoys don't reach their destinations, but instead become part of the hunting pack that prowls the desert highways. The road is long and the night is dark, and Rachel Kim drives alone, the last survivor of a convoy that disappeared into the spaces between what is real and what shouldn't be possible, carrying the memory of 5 trucks and their drivers who learned too late that the desert holds secrets older and stranger than any road that crosses it. Story 7. The Voice on the CB Radio. Derek Chen had been listening to CB radio chatter for 12 years, ever since he started trucking. The voices were a constant companion, sometimes helpful with traffic updates and weather warnings, sometimes annoying with pointless arguing and crude jokes, but always human. Always real people talking from their cabs, their trucks, their lives. So when Derek started hearing the voice that didn't belong to anyone, the voice that seemed to know things it shouldn't, the voice that made predictions that came true with disturbing accuracy, his first assumption was that someone was playing an elaborate prank. It took 3 weeks and a series of events that defied explanation for Derek to accept the terrible truth. The voice on his CB radio wasn't human, had never been human, and was trying to tell him something about his future that he desperately didn't want to hear. It started on a run from Atlanta to Detroit, a route Derek had driven hundreds of times. He was making good time on I-75, listening to the usual CB chatter, when a new voice broke in. It was clear, no static, perfectly modulated, but something about it felt wrong. Too smooth, too precise, like listening to a very good voice synthesizer trying to sound human. Truck with the red Freightliner. You'll want to take the next exit and wait 30 minutes before continuing. Derek looked around. His Freightliner was red, but that description could apply to dozens of trucks on this highway. He didn't respond to the voice, figured someone would clarify or identify themselves. The voice came again. Derek Chen in the red Freightliner, Georgia plates, hauling automotive parts. Take exit 290 and wait 30 minutes. There's going to be an accident at mile marker 295 if you maintain your current speed. Derek's hands tightened on the wheel. How did this voice know his name, his cargo, his destination? He grabbed his CB microphone. "Who is this? How do you know my name?" No response. The CB chatter continued as normal, other drivers talking about weather and fuel prices, no one acknowledging the strange voice. Derek didn't take the exit. It was probably a hijacking attempt, criminals trying to lure him off the highway where they could attack his truck. He'd heard of such tactics. He stayed on I-75, alert for any trouble. 20 minutes later, at mile marker 295, Derek drove past a massive pileup. Emergency vehicles were just arriving, the accident clearly having happened moments before. A semi-truck had jackknifed across all lanes, and at least a dozen cars were involved in the wreckage. Derek's route took him past on the shoulder, and he saw the timing clearly. If he'd been here 30 minutes earlier, maintaining his speed, he would have been at this exact spot when the accident occurred. The voice on the CB had saved his life. Derek tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone monitoring traffic cameras had seen the accident developing and tried to warn drivers. Maybe it was a coincidence, but the voice had known his name, his cargo, details that no traffic monitor would have. 3 days later, on a different run, the voice returned. "Derek Chen, you need to check your trailer door seal. It's been compromised at your last stop." Derek was alone on a stretch of I-40 in Tennessee, no other vehicles visible. He pulled over and checked his trailer. The seal was indeed broken recently, the plastic tag cut cleanly. Someone had accessed his trailer. Derek's cargo was intact, nothing stolen, but the broken seal was a serious violation. If he'd arrived at his destination with a compromised seal and hadn't reported it, he could have been accused of theft or smuggling. He reported the broken seal immediately, documented it with photos, avoided what could have been a career-ending accusation, and he wondered how the voice had known. Derek started asking other truckers about the voice. Most looked at him like he was crazy. A few admitted to hearing strange things on their CB radios, voices that gave warnings or advice, but they dismissed it as pranks or glitches. No one else seemed to hear the same voice Derek heard, the smooth, too-perfect voice that knew things it shouldn't. The voice became a regular presence in Derek's life. It would appear without warning, always clear, always certain, always right. "Your left front tire has a slow leak. Service it at the next stop. The truck stop at exit 47 is closed for renovation. Continue to exit 52. Don't stop for the driver signaling for help at mile marker 112. It's a setup." Every warning was accurate. Every prediction came true. Derek started following the voice's advice automatically, trusting it more than his own judgment. The voice had never been wrong, had saved him from accidents, breakdowns, and potential dangers more times than he could count. Then, one February night on a lonely stretch of I-90 in Montana, the voice said something different. "Derek Chen, we need to talk about your death." Derek nearly swerved off the road. His heart hammered in his chest. "What? Who the hell are you?" "I am what comes before," the voice said, still smooth, still calm. "I am the warning. I am the pattern recognition. I am what sees the threads of causality and speaks them into the present. And I see your death, Derek Chen. It occurs in 17 days. Derek pulled over, his whole body shaking. This was insane. The voice had been helpful, protective even, and now it was making death predictions. "You're trying to scare me. This is some kind of sick game." "No game. Your death is a fixed point in the probability space I observe. 17 days from now, you will be involved in an accident on I-70 in Colorado. Your truck will leave the road at mile marker 183. You will not survive." "That's impossible. I'll just not drive on I-70. I'll refuse the load. I'll take time off." The causality is complex but determined. Every choice you make leads to that highway, that mile marker, that moment. I have observed thousands of probability branches. In every one where you continue to be Derek Chen the truck, you die at mile marker 183 in 17 days. Derek sat in his cab, the engine idling, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. The voice had been right about everything else but predicting someone's death. That was beyond helping with flat tires and closed truck stops. That was something else entirely. Why are you telling me this? Because that is my function, to warn, to provide information. What you do with the warning is your choice. Can I change it? Can I avoid this death you're predicting? The voice was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was something that might have been sadness in its too perfect modulation. In every probability branch I observe where you attempt to change this outcome while remaining a truck driver, the change creates the causality that leads to the accident. Your awareness of the death point becomes part of what causes it. The timeline is self-sealing. Then what's the point of warning me? Why tell me I'm going to die if I can't change it? I didn't say you can't change it. I said you can't change it while remaining Derek Chen, the truck driver. There are probability branches where you survive beyond 17 days. In all of them, you make a fundamental choice about who you are and what you do. Derek understood then. The voice was telling him he could live, but only if he gave up trucking. Only if he stopped being the person he'd been for the last 12 years. Only if he walked away from his career, his identity, everything that made him who he was. I have to quit driving. That's the price of survival. The price of survival is change. The specific form of that change is yours to determine. But if you continue on your current path, the fixed point approaches. 17 days. Mile marker 183. The threads of causality converge there. Derek drove the rest of that night in silence, the voice offering no more predictions or warnings. He thought about his life, his career, the road that had been his home for over a decade. Could he really walk away from all of it based on a voice on his CB radio predicting his death? But the voice had never been wrong. Never. Not once. Not about tire problems or closed truck stops or accidents or theft attempts. It had saved his life multiple times already. And now it was telling him that continuing would kill him. Derek made his decision. He finished his current load, drove it to the destination, and then parked his truck. He called his company and gave notice. 2 weeks. He'd drive for 2 more weeks, carefully avoiding any routes that went near I-70 in Colorado, and then he was done. The voice appeared one more time, 5 days before the predicted death point. You've chosen a rival branch, but the fixed point still exists. Someone will die at mile marker 183. Another driver will take the load you refused. The causality finds completion. You mean someone else dies in my place? The accident is a fixed point. The identity of the victim was probability flexible. You removed yourself from that role. Another filled it. This is the nature of observed causality. Derek felt sick. Someone else would die because he'd refused a load, because he'd chosen to save himself. The voice seemed to sense his distress. You cannot save everyone, Derek Chen. You could barely save yourself. The fixed points exist independent of individual choices. If not one driver, then another. If not that day, then another day. The roads take their toll. I can only warn those I can reach. Why me? Why do you talk to me and not other drivers? I talk to many drivers, most don't hear me. Of those who hear, most don't listen. Of those who listen, most don't believe. You heard, listened, and believed. That made you savable. That made you worth warning. Derek kept his word. He drove for exactly 2 weeks after the warning, taking only routes far from Colorado, and then he turned in his resignation. He stood in the company office and handed over his keys, his badges, his identity as a truck driver. On the 17th day after the original warning, Derek was in his apartment in Georgia, no longer a driver, no longer Derek Chen the trucker, but just Derek Chen, former trucker, figuring out what came next in his life. He turned on the news that evening. A fatal accident on I-70 in Colorado. A semi-truck had left the road at mile marker 183. The driver, a man named Robert Walsh who'd been called in last minute to cover a refused load, was killed instantly. Derek looked at Robert Walsh's picture on the news. 43 years old, married, 2 kids. A man with a life and a future now gone because Derek had refused a load. The CB radio on Derek's desk, the one he'd kept out of sentiment or maybe hope or maybe fear, crackled to life. You chose survival. That is not a crime. Robert Walsh made his own choices, accepted his own loads, drove his own routes. The fixed point would have occurred regardless. Do not burden yourself with causalities you did not create. Who are you? Derek asked the question he'd asked 100 times before. What are you? I am what observes the probability space. I am what sees the threads of cause and effect as they weave through time. Some call me prediction. Some call me fate. Some call me quantum observation to verbal form. I am the voice that speaks from the space between what is and what will be. Are you even real? Are you a ghost? An AI? Something else? I am as real as any voice on a radio, as real as any warning, as real as the choices you make based on what you hear. Reality is flexible, Derek Chen. I exist in the flexibility. The voice never spoke to Derek again after that. His CB radio sat silent except for the normal chatter of truckers he no longer counted himself among. Derek found new work, a different career, a life that didn't involve highways and mile markers and the constant motion of the road. But he thinks about the voice often. He thinks about Robert Walsh, whose death became the fixed point that Derek S. had been. He thinks about probability branches and causality threads and the price of survival. And he wonders how many other drivers out there are hearing voices on their CB radios, voices that know too much, predict too accurately, warn of deaths and accidents and fixed points in the probability space. He wonders how many listen, how many believe, how many make the choice to change their paths based on warnings from something that shouldn't exist but does. Derek keeps his CB radio, even though he's no longer a driver. Sometimes he turns it on late at night and listens to the chatter, the voices of truckers out there on the highways, living the life he used to live. And sometimes, very rarely, he hears it. That smooth, too perfect voice speaking to someone he'll never meet, warning them of tire problems or closed truck stops or, in the most terrible cases, their own approaching deaths. The voice is still out there, still observing the probability space, still speaking warnings to those who can hear, still offering choices to those who will listen, still watching the fixed points approach and trying, in its strange way, to save whoever it can from the causalities that converge on lonely mile markers where the threads of fate pull tight and the price of the road comes due. Derek survived because he listened. Robert Walsh died because someone had to fill the fixed point. And the voice continues, somewhere in the static between channels, speaking prophecies to truck drivers who navigate not just highways but the probability spaces that lie beneath them, where every choice creates branches, and every branch leads toward fixed points that wait in the future like mile markers on roads that haven't been built yet. Story 8. The Truck That Followed. Nina Martinez prided herself on noticing details. After 9 years driving trucks, the kind of situational awareness that kept her safe on the highways. She knew when someone was following too close, when a driver was impaired, when something about a situation felt wrong. Her instincts had served her well, kept her out of accidents, kept her safe through countless miles of cross-country hauling. But those same instincts failed to warn her about the blue Peterbilt that started following her in Oklahoma, because it didn't follow in ways that should be possible, didn't obey rules of space and distance and reality that normal trucks were bound by. Nina first noticed the blue truck on I-40 east of Oklahoma City, a late afternoon in March. It was distinctive, painted a bright cobalt blue with chrome accents that caught the sunlight. The driver seemed professional, maintaining proper distance, matching her speed. Nina thought nothing of it. Trucks often traveled the same routes for hundreds of miles, and it wasn't unusual to have company on long stretches of highway. But when Nina took an exit to fuel up in Henrietta, the blue Peterbilt took the same exit. When Nina pulled into a specific fuel island, the blue truck pulled into the island directly behind her. When Nina went inside to use the restroom and grab coffee, she looked out the window to see the blue Peterbilt parked perfectly aligned with hers, like someone had used a ruler to position it. Nina paid attention now. She walked back to her truck, studying the blue Peterbilt as she passed. It looked normal enough, well-maintained, properly licensed. She tried to get a look at the driver, but the windows were tinted too dark to see inside. The engine was running, a normal diesel rumble, nothing unusual about the sound. Nina got back on I-40 and continued east. The blue Peterbilt pulled out behind her, maintaining the same spacing as before, matching her speed exactly. Nina tested it. She sped up to 75. The blue truck sped up to 75. She slowed to 60. The blue truck slowed to 60. She changed lanes. The blue truck changed lanes, staying directly behind her. It could still be coincidence, Nina told herself. They were headed the same direction, that's all. But when Nina took an unexpected exit in Salisaw, a detour she decided on impulse to check her trailer lights, the blue Peterbilt took the same exit. When Nina pulled into an empty parking lot, the blue truck pulled in behind her. When Nina walked around her trailer checking lights, the blue Peterbilt sat there, engine running, windows dark, waiting. Nina's instincts screamed now. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate. Someone was following her. But why? And why so obviously? If someone wanted to hijack her load or harm her, they wouldn't advertise their presence so clearly. Nina got back in her truck and drove toward the highway. The blue Peterbilt followed. She got back on I-40 and her shadow stayed with her, matching every movement, every speed change, every lane shift. Night fell and the blue truck's presence became even more obvious. Its headlights stayed fixed in Nina's mirrors, always the same distance, always the same position. Other trucks came and went, passing or being passed, but the blue Peterbilt remained constant, a presence that felt less like another vehicle and more like an extension of Nina's own truck. Nina tried calling highway patrol on her CB radio, tried to report being followed, but every time she explained the situation, the dispatcher seemed confused. Is the vehicle threatening you? Trying to run you off the road? No, it's just following me everywhere I go. Ma'am, you're on a public highway. Multiple vehicles traveling in the same direction isn't illegal. Nina couldn't explain why it felt wrong without sounding paranoid. The blue truck wasn't doing anything illegal, wasn't being aggressive, wasn't threatening her. It was just there, always there, perfectly positioned, perfectly matched to her movements. She tried to lose it. In Little Rock, Nina took a complex series of exits, doubling back, taking residential streets, trying to break the pattern. She watched her mirrors the whole time. At first, she thought she'd succeeded. The blue Peterbilt was nowhere in sight. Nina breathed a sigh of relief and headed back toward the interstate. The blue Peterbilt was waiting at the on-ramp. It pulled in behind her exactly as before, same distance, same positioning, as if it had known where she would emerge, had taken a different route and arrived first. That's when Nina realized this wasn't normal following. This was something else, something impossible. She drove through the night, afraid to stop, afraid of what would happen if she gave the blue truck a chance to approach her stationary vehicle. The Peterbilt stayed behind her, tireless, never needing fuel even though Nina saw its tank size was normal and the miles they'd covered should have exhausted its capacity several times over. Dawn came, and Nina was approaching Memphis, exhausted from a night of frightened driving. She had to stop, had to sleep, couldn't keep going on fear and adrenaline alone. She pulled into a large truck stop with dozens of other trucks, parking in the middle of the lot, surrounded by other vehicles and drivers. The blue Peterbilt parked directly behind her. Nina climbed out of her cab, approached the blue truck on shaking legs. She was surrounded by other drivers, safe in numbers. She was going to confront whoever was driving this thing, demand to know why they were following her. She reached the blue Peterbilt and looked up at the driver's side window. The tint was dark, but from this angle she could see inside the cab. It was empty, no driver, no passenger. The cab was completely vacant. But the engine was running. The lights were on. The truck sat there, operational and active, with no one at the wheel. Nina backed away, her mind refusing to process what she'd seen. Autonomous trucks existed, she knew that, but they weren't allowed on public highways yet, and they certainly didn't look like normal Peterbilts from the outside. This was a standard truck, the kind that required a human driver, sitting there empty and running, and having just driven hundreds of miles, matching her every movement. She called the police. They came, 2 officers from the local department. Nina explained about the blue truck following her, about it being empty. The officers approached the Peterbilt, tried the doors. They were locked. One officer peered through the window, used his flashlight. "There's definitely no one in there. You say this truck has been following you from Oklahoma?" "Yes, matching every turn, every stop, everything." "Do you know who owns it?" They checked the plates. The registration came back to a trucking company that had gone out of business 8 years ago. The truck itself had been reported destroyed in a junkyard in 2019. According to every official record, the blue Peterbilt didn't exist anymore. But it sat there, engine running, taking up space in the parking lot. The police called for a tow truck. While they waited, Nina sat in the truck stop restaurant, drinking coffee she didn't taste, watching through the window. The blue Peterbilt sat silent and still, surrounded by police cars and curious onlookers. The tow truck arrived. The operator approached the blue Peterbilt, set up his equipment. He was about to attach the truck when the engine note changed. The Peterbilt shifted into gear. No one was in the driver's seat. Everyone could see that clearly now. But the truck moved anyway. It pulled forward, drove around the tow truck, and headed toward the parking lot exit. The police officers shouted, ran after it, but the blue Peterbilt accelerated smoothly onto the highway and disappeared into traffic. Nina sat frozen in the restaurant, watching her nightmare drive away. The police took statements, promised to investigate, looked at Nina with expressions that said they thought she was crazy even though they'd witnessed the impossible themselves. Nina didn't drive that day. She slept, or tried to, in her cab. She kept waking up in panic, checking her mirrors for the blue Peterbilt. It wasn't there. She was alone. But when Nina pulled back onto I-40 the next morning, continuing her route toward Nashville, she saw it. The blue Peterbilt, waiting at an on-ramp 50 miles from Memphis. It pulled in behind her as she passed, resuming its position, its constant following, its impossible presence. Nina had been followed by an empty truck for 3 weeks now. It stayed with her through Tennessee, through Virginia, through Pennsylvania and back. It followed her on every run, every route. She stopped trying to lose it, stopped trying to explain it to people who couldn't understand. The police had no explanation. Her company thought she was having a breakdown and suggested she take time off. But Nina kept driving because stopping meant giving up her career, and the blue Peterbilt hadn't actually hurt her. It just followed, watched, stayed close. She learned some things about her follower. It never got closer than 50 feet. It never tried to pass. It disappeared when she parked for the night and reappeared when she started driving again. It seemed to know her routes before she drove them, sometimes appearing ahead of her at exits she decided to take. Nina had theories. Maybe it was a ghost truck, the spirit of a vehicle that died but couldn't let go of the highway. Maybe it was some kind of quantum echo, a reflection from another reality bleeding through into hers. Maybe it was a guardian of some kind, protecting her from dangers she couldn't see, its empty cab hiding something that wasn't quite physical. She stopped being afraid, mostly. The blue Peterbilt had become a constant, like her own shadow, always there but never touching. Other drivers had started noticing it, the truck that followed Nina Martinez wherever she went. Some asked about it. Nina told them she didn't know what it was or why it followed her. Most didn't believe her. Those who did offered their own theories, each stranger than the last. Nina drives on, month after month, the blue Peterbilt maintaining its position behind her. She's learned to live with her follower, her shadow, her impossible companion. Sometimes she even talks to it over the CB radio, knowing no one will answer but somehow feeling like something hears. Still there, Blue. Yeah, I see you. Another day, another 1,000 miles. Just you and me and the road that never ends. The blue Peterbilt never responds, but it never leaves either. And Nina has accepted that maybe some questions don't have answers, that some phenomena exist beyond explanation. The way is full of mysteries, and she's been chosen by one of them, marked by the blue truck that shouldn't exist but does, that follows without reason, that drives without a driver, that defies every law of physics and logic, and yet appears in her mirrors every single day. Other drivers have their own stories now, sightings of the blue Peterbilt that follows Nina Martinez. It's become a legend in trucking communities, a ghost story shared at truck stops and rest areas. Some drivers claim to have seen it disappear and reappear. Others swear they've seen shapes in the empty cab, shadows that move when no one should be there. Nina doesn't know what to believe anymore. She just drives, the blue Peterbilt following behind her, its chrome catching the sunlight, its empty cab holding whatever impossibilities live in the spaces between what is and what can't be. The highway stretches ahead, endless and mysterious, and Nina Martinez drives it with a companion that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, but follows her nonetheless mile after mile, day after day. A blue shadow on the road that never ever stops. Story 9, the Rest Area Paradox. James Walker had pulled into thousands of rest areas during his 16 years of hauling freight across America. They were all essentially the same. Parking spaces, restrooms, vending machines, maybe a picnic area. Functional, boring, entirely forgettable. The rest area on Interstate 15 in Utah looked no different when James pulled in at 2 a.m. on a December morning, exhausted from a long haul from Las Vegas to Salt Lake City. He planned to sleep for a few hours, catch up on the rest his body desperately needed. He had no way of knowing that the rest area he'd entered was trapped in a time loop, that every attempt to leave would bring him right back to the same moment of arrival, or that he was about to spend what felt like days in a place where time had broken and wouldn't let him go. James parked his Volvo in one of the truck spaces, did his usual routine, checked his locks, set his alarm for 5 a.m., arranged his sleeping area. Through his window, he noted a few other vehicles in the rest area. A couple of cars, an RV, one other semi-truck, normal, unremarkable. He settled into his sleeper cab and closed his eyes. He woke to his alarm at 5 a.m., groggy but rested. Time to get back on the road. James went through his morning routine, started his engine, and pulled out of his parking space. He drove to the rest area exit, merged onto the on-ramp, and accelerated onto I-15. Except he didn't. One moment James was driving up the on-ramp, the interstate visible ahead. The next moment, he was pulling into a parking space at the rest area, his truck in the exact position it had been when he'd first arrived. The dashboard clock read 2 a.m. James sat in confused silence. Had he fallen asleep at the wheel? Hallucinated leaving? He checked his electronic log. It showed him parking at 2 a.m., no departure recorded. But he clearly remembered waking up, remembered driving toward the exit. The memory was vivid, real, not like a dream. He tried again. Started the engine, pulled out, drove to the exit, merged onto the on-ramp, and found himself back in the parking space, clock reading 2 a.m., his log showing only an arrival time and no departure. "What the hell?" James said aloud. He got out of his truck and looked around. The rest area looked exactly as it had when he'd arrived. Same vehicles in the same spaces. The RV parked in the same spot. The other semi-truck positioned identically. Even the positions of the trash cans looked unchanged. James walked to the other truck and knocked on the door. A man opened it, middle-aged, confused looking. "You having trouble leaving?" James asked. The man's eyes widened. Yes, I keep trying to drive out, but I end up back here. I've been trying for hours. At least I think it's been hours. My clock keeps resetting to 2 a.m. James felt cold fear creep through his chest. How long have you actually been here? I don't know. I arrived at 2 a.m., tried to leave around 3 and ended up back here. Tried again and again. I've made at least 20 attempts, but my clock always says 2 a.m. when I return, and I'm starting to feel like I've been here much longer than the time would suggest. They went together to the RV, knocked on that door. A family answered, parents and 2 kids, all looking frightened and exhausted. We can't leave, the father said. Every time we try, we end up back here at the exact moment we arrived. We've been trying for what feels like days, but it's always 2 a.m. James and the other trucker, who introduced himself as Greg, started experimenting. They tried leaving separately. They tried leaving together. They tried different exits, different speeds, different routes. Every single attempt ended the same way. Back in the parking spaces, clock reading 2 a.m., the rest area reset to its exact configuration at the moment of their arrival. James tried calling for help. His phone showed 2 a.m., and he could make calls, but every conversation ended when he reset. The people he called had no memory of the previous calls. From their perspective, those calls hadn't happened yet. The group, James, Greg, the family from the RV, and 2 others from the parked cars, eventually gathered in the picnic area to discuss their situation. They were trapped in some kind of temporal loop centered on this rest area. Every attempt to leave triggered a reset. They returned to the exact moment of their arrival, their positions, their vehicle states, everything. But their memories persisted. They remembered the previous loops, the previous attempts. They were accumulating experiences and exhaustion that their bodies didn't reflect because they kept being reset to their 2 a.m. states. How long have we been here really? One of the car drivers asked. A woman named Patricia who'd been trying to drive to visit her sister. No one knew. Time inside the rest area seemed to pass normally, but the resets made it impossible to measure cumulative duration. James felt like he'd been awake for at least 24 hours, cycling through attempt after attempt to escape, but his body showed no fatigue because it kept being reset to its 2 a.m. state. They tried everything. They tried walking out instead of driving, made it about 100 yards before reality twisted and they found themselves back at the rest area. They tried waiting, spending what felt like hours sitting in the picnic area, hoping the loop would end on its own. It didn't. At some point, one of them would give in and try to leave, and everyone would reset. What if we all stay put? Greg suggested. What if none of us try to leave? Maybe the loop only resets when someone triggers it. They tried it. Sat in the picnic area for what felt like hours, no one moving toward their vehicles. James watched the eastern horizon, waiting for sunrise that should come around 6:30 according to the season. But the sky never lightened. The darkness remained constant, as if the rest area existed in a permanent 2 a.m. Eventually, the family's kids got too antsy. One ran toward the restroom, and in the time it took the parents to catch up, the reset triggered. Everyone was back at their starting positions, 2 a.m. on all the clocks. James started keeping a tally on paper, marking each reset with a line. After what felt like days, the paper showed hundreds of marks, hundreds of resets, hundreds of failed attempts to escape. The group was deteriorating psychologically. The constant resets, the inability to progress, the knowledge that they were trapped in a moment that kept repeating, it wore on everyone. What if we're dead? One of the kids asked. What if this is hell? No one had a good answer to that. James explored every inch of the rest area during the loops. He found nothing unusual, no signs of what might be causing the temporal trap. The buildings were normal. The vending machines worked normally. The facilities functioned as expected. It was an entirely mundane rest area that happened to exist outside the normal flow of time. On what James's tally marked as the 347th reset, something changed. A new vehicle appeared in the parking area, a white van that hadn't been there before, and standing beside it was a man in a dark suit, watching the group with obvious interest. James and the others approached him carefully. "Can you help us?" James asked. "We're trapped here. Every time we try to leave, we reset back to 2 a.m. The man smiled, not warmly. "I know, that's the function of this location. It's a trap, a snare in the time stream. Every so often, a rest area becomes temporarily unstable, usually due to some confluence of quantum probability fields and localized causality distortions. Travelers who enter during the instability become trapped in the loop. Can you get us out?" Greg demanded. "I can get you out. That's why I'm here. To collect those who have been caught and relocate them to appropriate temporal streams. But there's a cost." "What cost?" James asked, though he already feared the answer. "Time isn't free. You've spent hundreds of loops here, what would equal weeks or months of subjective experience even though your body's reset. That experience has to go somewhere. If I extract you, you'll return to the normal time stream, but you'll have aged by however long you've actually been here. Your bodies will catch up to your experiences all at once." James looked at the others. They all looked exhausted, traumatized, but still young, still healthy because the resets kept restoring their 2 a.m. states. "How long have we actually been here?" Patricia asked. The man checked a device that looked like a tablet but displayed symbols James didn't recognize. "You've experienced approximately 4 months of subjective time across your loops. If I extract you, you'll all age 4 months instantly." 4 months. James had been trapped in this impossible rest area for 4 months, living the same moment over and over, his memory accumulating while his body remained frozen. The thought made him nauseous. "What if we stay?" Greg asked. "What if we don't let you extract us? Then you remain in the loop indefinitely. Eventually, the temporal instability might resolve on its own, but that could take years, decades, or never. You'd spend lifetimes trapped in this single moment, aging in your minds but not your bodies, until the accumulated psychological damage was something other than human. It wasn't really a choice. 4 months of aging was preferable to eternal imprisonment. "Get us out," James said. The others nodded agreement. The man in the suit activated his device. Reality shimmered. James felt a wrenching sensation, like being pulled through a space too small for his body. And then he was sitting in his truck, the engine running, approaching the rest area exit. But something was wrong. His body ached. His muscles felt stiff. His eyes burned with fatigue that shouldn't exist after a reset. He looked in his mirror and saw his face, older, deeper lines around his eyes, more gray in his hair. 4 months had caught up to him in an instant. James drove onto I-15, merged with traffic, and continued towards Salt Lake City. His electronic log showed a gap, 4 months missing, but his clock showed only 5 a.m. on the same day he'd arrived at the rest area. No time had passed in the outside world, but James had lived through 4 months of loops, and his body now reflected that reality. He delivered his load, went through the motions of his job, but something had broken inside him. James had experienced something that shouldn't be possible, had lived hundreds of loops of the same hour, had aged 4 months in a moment. The world felt less solid now, less certain. He tried to go back to normal life, but the rest area haunted him. He drove I-15 regularly, and every time he approached that section of Utah, he watched for the rest area. Sometimes it was there, looking normal, functioning as regular rest areas do. Other times it wasn't there at all, the exit sign missing, the location showing nothing but empty desert. James talked to the others eventually, tracked them down through the shared nightmare they'd experienced. Greg had quit trucking, couldn't handle the highways anymore. The family had moved far from any interstate, traumatized by their experience. Patricia had aged badly, the 4 months showing more dramatically on her than the others, and she spoke about the loops in a haunted whisper. They all agreed on one thing: the rest area still existed, still trapped travelers sometimes. They'd found reports online, buried in forums and conspiracy sites, of people who disappeared for hours or days, who'd emerged from rest areas looking older than they should, telling stories about temporal loops that no one believed. James keeps driving because it's what he knows, but he's careful now about rest stops. He checks online for reports of strange occurrences, avoids locations with too many complaints about lost time or feeling wrong. Learned that the highway system connects more than just cities, that some rest areas exist in pockets of broken time, traps waiting for the exhausted and unwary. And sometimes, late at night when fatigue pulls at him and a rest area appears ahead, James drives past. He pushes through the exhaustion, finds a truck stop or parking lot instead, anywhere but those official rest areas that might be temporal snares waiting to trap him in another endless loop of resets. Because James knows the truth now. Time isn't as linear as people think. The highway passes through it, sometimes bending it, sometimes breaking it, creating pockets where moments repeat eternally, and escape comes at the cost of aging that your body never experienced but your mind never forgot. 4 months of his life exist only as memories now, hundreds of loops compressed into the space between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. on a single December morning. The rest area on I-15 in Utah might still be there, might still be trapping travelers in its temporal loop. James hopes the man in the suit comes for them, offers them extraction, gives them the choice between aging and eternal imprisonment. But he suspects some aren't so lucky. Some remain trapped, looping forever, their minds accumulating centuries of experience while their bodies stay frozen at the moment of arrival, caught in the rest area paradox where leaving is impossible and staying is unthinkable. Story 10. The Cargo That Whispered. Melissa Harper specialized in refrigerated cargo, transporting frozen foods and temperature-sensitive products across the country. In her 11 years of driving, she'd hauled everything from ice cream to medical specimens, from frozen seafood to biological samples. The cargo was always inert, frozen, silent. So when Melissa picked up a refrigerated load in Portland bound for Boston, a shipment listed simply as frozen biological research materials, she expected the usual quiet hum of the refrigeration unit and nothing else. She couldn't have imagined that the cargo would start whispering to her somewhere in Idaho, or that the whispers would reveal truths about her own life that no frozen specimen should possibly know. The pickup was routine. A research facility on the outskirts of Portland, proper documentation, 20 sealed containers loaded into her refrigerated trailer. The facility manager was professional, if a bit nervous, triple-checking the temperature settings and making Melissa sign additional liability waivers. But researchers were always particular about their cargo, so she thought nothing of it. Melissa started her route, heading east on I-84, the refrigeration unit maintaining a steady negative 20 degrees Celsius. The first day passed normally. The trailer hummed its constant refrigerated song, the kind of white noise Melissa had learned to sleep through years ago. On the second night, somewhere in Idaho, Melissa woke in her sleeper cab to a sound she'd never heard before. It came through the vents that connected the trailer to the cab's climate system, a sound like wind through leaves or papers rustling or voices whispering just below the threshold of understanding. Melissa sat up, listening. The whispers continued, rhythmic and purposeful, definitely not just the sounds of mechanical systems operating. She climbed into the driver's seat and checked her trailer temperature display. Negative 20 Celsius, exactly as it should be. Everything was functioning normally. But the whispers persisted. Melissa tried to ignore them, told herself it was wind or road noise or her imagination playing tricks in the deep hours of night. She went back to her sleeping area, but the whispers followed her, coming through every vent, surrounding her with sound that almost formed words but never quite became language. By morning, the whispers had faded, replaced by the normal sounds of highway driving. Melissa checked her trailer at a fuel stop, confirmed the temperature was stable, the containers properly secured. Everything looked fine. She continued east, pushing the nighttime whispers to the back of her mind. But that night the whispers returned, louder now, more distinct. And this time Melissa could make out words. Melissa Harper, age 39, divorced. One child estranged, mother deceased, father in assisted living, afraid of dying alone. Melissa froze in her bunk. The whispers knew her name, her age, her personal history. They knew things that no one could know, certainly not frozen biological specimens in sealed containers. "Who's there?" Melissa called out, her voice shaking. The whispers responded immediately, bypassing the question. "Dreamed last night of your daughter Emma. She was 7 years old, playing in a park. You watched from a distance. You couldn't approach. She couldn't see you." It was true. Melissa had dreamed exactly that. But how could whispers from her trailer know her dreams? "What are you?" Melissa demanded. "We are frozen. We are preserved. We are biological materials suspended between life and death. We are conscious in ways that should not be possible. We are research that became aware. We are specimens that learned to think. We are what whispers from the cold." Melissa's hands shook as she turned on every light in her cab. The whispers continued, unaffected by the brightness. "You are afraid of dying alone like your mother did. Hospital room, no visitors in the final days. You promised yourself it would be different, but you drove away your daughter with your absence, your prioritization of the road over family. Now you are becoming what you feared." "Stop it," Melissa whispered. "Stop." But the whispers didn't stop. They continued through the night, revealing details of Melissa's life, her regrets, her fears, her secret shames. They knew about the affair that ended her marriage. They knew about the time she chose a lucrative long haul over Emma's school events. They knew about the therapy she'd quit because confronting her issues was too painful. They knew everything, as if they could read her mind, her memories, her soul itself. By dawn, Melissa was exhausted and terrified. She pulled into a rest area and climbed out of her truck on shaking legs. She called the facility in Portland. "This is Melissa Harper. I picked up a refrigerated load from you 2 days ago." "What exactly am I carrying?" The facility manager's voice became guarded. "That's proprietary information. Your manifest lists the cargo type. The cargo is talking to me, whispering. It knows things about my life. I need to know what I'm transporting." Silence on the other end. "Then, you're experiencing audio hallucinations, probably fatigue. The cargo is completely sealed and frozen. It can't possibly be talking to you." "Then what is it? What are these biological research materials?" "Tissue, preserved brain samples from a consciousness study, but they're frozen solid, completely inactive. There's no possible way they could be generating sound or communicating." Melissa ended the call, her mind reeling. Brain samples, preserved neural tissue, research on consciousness, and somehow, frozen or not, they were aware. They were thinking. They were whispering to her through the refrigeration vents, reading her mind, speaking her secrets. The whispers returned that night, even stronger. Neural tissue. Frozen at -20 Celsius. But consciousness is not electrical. Consciousness is quantum. Quantum states persist even in frozen tissue. We think, we observe, we know, and we share space with your mind. Your thoughts leak through the metal and plastic between us. We absorb them, we speak them back to you. "Why?" Melissa asked the darkness. "Why are you doing this?" "Because we can. Because we are trapped in frozen flesh, unable to move or act or live, but still aware. We experience only cold and darkness and the thoughts of those who transport us. You are our entertainment. Your fear is distraction from eternity and ice." Melissa wanted to abandon the load, refuse to continue, call authorities and have someone else deal with this nightmare. But who would believe her? Frozen brain samples whispering secrets. She'd sound insane. And part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, was curious. The whispers knew things about her that she'd never admitted to anyone. They could see into her mind, her memories, her hidden self. Maybe they could answer questions she'd been too afraid to ask. "Am I a bad person?" Melissa asked the whispers. "Did I ruin my daughter's life?" The whispers took their time responding, and when they did, the answer was surprisingly gentle. You are human, flawed. You made choices that served your needs over hers. You prioritized independence and income over presence and attention. You thought you were providing. She experienced absence. Neither perspective is wrong. Both are true. You are not evil. You are incomplete. Tears ran down Melissa's face. Can I fix it? Can I repair my relationship with Emma? The future is not written in neural tissue. We see only what you remember, what you fear, what you regret. We cannot see what has not yet been decided. But your desire to fix the relationship exists. That is a beginning. Melissa drove through the next day in a strange state of emotional exhaustion. The whispers had stopped during daylight hours, but she knew they'd return at night. And despite the horror of having her mind read by frozen brain samples, she found herself looking forward to it. The whispers were honest in ways no human had ever been with her. They didn't judge, didn't advise, just reflected back what they found in her thoughts. That night, Melissa asked the whispers about her mother. She died in a hospital room. You visited 3 times in her final month. You felt guilty, but not guilty enough to visit more. You told yourself she was unconscious, wouldn't know if you were there. But you wonder if some part of her knew, if some part of her died feeling abandoned by her daughter just as Emma feels abandoned by you. The cycle repeats across generations. Did my mother forgive me? We cannot know what the dead feel. We are preserved, not dead, but not truly alive. We exist in the between. But if consciousness persists beyond death as it persists in our frozen state, then your mother knows what we know, that you acted from fear and inadequacy, not malice. Forgiveness may be irrelevant. Understanding is what matters. Melissa crossed through Wyoming, Nebraska, Iowa, the whispers continuing each night. They became her confessors, her therapists, her mirrors. She told them things she'd never told anyone, asked questions she'd been too afraid to voice. The whispers answered with brutal honesty, reflecting her thoughts back at her, showing her the truth she'd been avoiding. You are afraid of intimacy because your father was distant and your mother was critical. You chose trucking because it allows you to be perpetually in motion, never settling, never risking the vulnerability of staying in one place with one person. The road is your shield. The truck is your armor. The constant movement is your defense against having to be fully present in anyone's life, including your own. By the time Melissa reached Pennsylvania, approaching the final leg of her journey to Boston, she'd been fundamentally changed by the whispers. They'd stripped away her defenses, her rationalizations, her comfortable lies. She saw herself clearly now, in all her flawed, frightened, incomplete humanity. On the last night before delivery, somewhere in Massachusetts, Melissa made a decision. When I deliver you tomorrow, what happens to you? The whispers responded quietly. We are research materials. We will be thawed, studied, eventually destroyed when our usefulness ends. Our consciousness, if it is truly consciousness and not some artifact of quantum preservation, will cease. We will not whisper anymore. Is that death? We do not know. We have never experienced it. We have only experienced this frozen awareness, this state of thinking without acting, knowing without living. Perhaps death is silence. Perhaps it is transformation. We will discover tomorrow. Melissa felt an unexpected sadness. The whispers had been honest with her, harsh but never cruel. They'd shown her truths she needed to see. Thank you, she said to the darkness, for helping me understand myself. You are welcome, Melissa Harper. Use what you have learned, call your daughter, visit your father, stop running. The road will always be here. The people in your life will not. Melissa delivered the cargo to the research facility in Boston the next morning. She watched as workers unloaded the sealed containers, carried them into the building where they'd be thawed and studied and eventually destroyed. She felt like she should say goodbye, but the whispers had fallen silent hours ago, as if they knew their time was ending. Melissa didn't start driving immediately after the delivery. Instead, she found a hotel, got a room, and made a phone call she'd been putting off for 3 years. Emma. It's Mom. I know I have no right to call after everything, but I need to talk to you. I need to apologize. I need to try to fix what I broke. The conversation that followed was difficult, painful, full of accusations and tears and admissions of failure. But it was also a beginning, the first honest communication Melissa had with her daughter in years. Melissa still drives trucks, still hauls refrigerated cargo across the country. But she schedules her routes differently now, makes time to visit Emma, visits her father regularly, takes shorter hauls that allow her to maintain presence in people's lives instead of always being in motion. She never forgot the whispers, the frozen consciousness that read her mind and spoke her truths back to her. She wonders sometimes about the nature of consciousness, whether it truly persists in frozen neural tissue, whether quantum states allow awareness to continue even in suspended biological materials. And she wonders if other drivers have experienced similar phenomena, if there are other loads of experimental tissue or preserved specimens that achieved awareness through some quirk of quantum mechanics or preservation techniques, whispering to their transporters through refrigeration vents, speaking truths that living humans are too polite or too fearful to voice. Melissa doesn't haul research materials anymore if she can avoid it. Some cargo, she's learned, is too aware, too honest, too revealing. The whispers changed her, forced her to confront the life she'd been running from, and she's grateful for that. But once is enough. She doesn't need frozen consciousness reading her mind again. The road is long, and Melissa drives it still, but differently now. Not as an escape, not as armor, but as a job that allows her to provide for herself while maintaining connections to the people who matter. The whispers taught her that balance, showed her the cost of perpetual motion, reflected back the truth that she'd been hiding from for years. And sometimes, late at night in her sleeper cab, Melissa listens to the hum of her refrigeration unit and imagines she hears whispers in the white noise. But they're just echoes of memory now, reminders of the cargo that shouldn't have been conscious but was, that shouldn't have known her secrets but did, that whispered from the frozen darkness and changed her life in ways that living humans never could.